Number 1. This happened to my father in 1975 in a little country bumpkin town when he was 7 years old and his sister was 9. I will be recounting this as he recounts what happened. My father was a truck driver who had to be up at 2 a.m. every morning. That meant we had a rule in our house that no matter what, you can't wake Daddy up when he goes to bed at 7 p.m. My mother worked at an old folks' home till 10 p.m. every night, so for a couple of hours it was just me and my sister in the house by ourselves. It was our bedtime one night, so me and my sister went to bed. In a couple of minutes, I heard something hitting the side of the house. Then it started hitting my window. It was really weird, so I got my sister to come in my room. We looked out the window and saw a man bouncing one of my toys against the window and catching it. He put his hand to his mouth and motioned for us to be quiet. Then he motioned for us to go outside and play with him. We were frozen in fear. Then he started walking away and we couldn't see him out of the window. We ran to the kitchen and there he was motioning for us to open the sliding door. We knew we couldn't wake Daddy up, so we ran and hid in the living room. The man walked to our front door and started whispering something we couldn't understand and making scratching noises. All we could do was cry and remain paralysed. We saw car lights approaching the house. It was my mother returning home from work. We watched as the man ran off the porch and hid behind my father's truck. We watched the man smile and wait till our mother got out of the car. She got out, opened the trunk, got her belongings and walked up the porch. I'm embarrassed to say we were too scared to open the door and warn her. All we could do was watch as the man sneakily tiptoed up behind her. She opened the front door and shut it behind her. She saw us hiding, and just as she was about to yell at us for being up so late, she saw our fear-stricken eyes glued to the glass on the front door. She turned around and saw his face pressed against the glass and him jiggling the doorknob. Then the man shouted profanities and how he was going to assault her children in front of her. She called the police and told them as well. Next thing we know, my grandfather is speeding up the driveway with his gun out the window, just firing it randomly. The police pulled up just as the man took off into the woods. They saw his back, but that was it. They chased through the woods with dogs and had the whole squad out searching. Other officers inspected the house and saw multiple scratch marks at our doors and side of the house. Apparently, he tried to break in and couldn't, so he tried to lure us into letting him in. They never found out who it was, and that was the last we ever saw of him. We were all pretty traumatized for a while, but it didn't bother our dad one bit. In fact, he didn't wake up the entire time. So, weirdo back in 75, I'm so glad we haven't met again, because if we do, you will be the one who says let's not meet. Number 2. I think this is a good place to share something that happened to my mother. You've probably heard of the Canadian serial killer Paul Bernado. There was a movie about him and his wife called Carla that starred Misha Collins. Misha doesn't want people to watch it though because it's terrible and the director was a creep. Well, my mum is pretty sure she ran into him back in the day and could have become one of his victims. It was sometime in the late 80s. She was in her 20s at the time, and she was driving home from work in Scarborough and stopped for gas. I don't remember what the issue was, but she needed help with something, so she got some help from an attractive guy who was nearby. He ended up asking her out to dinner that night, and she probably would have said yes, except that she had to help her friends with moving. They never met up again or anything, but a few years later, when she saw on the news about Bernado being arrested and all that, she thought it was the same guy. I'm glad she couldn't go out with him. It's too creepy to think about what might have happened to her if she had. Number 3. This story happened to my mum about 2 years ago. So, I live in a small town in Belgium where everyone knows everyone. My mum had just quit her job due to health problems and was a stay-at-home mum, you can say. With my dad working and my siblings and I in school, she was used to being home alone. Living in a small town, nothing really bad happens, so being home alone was never an issue. Besides, we had a dog, so if anything were to happen, my rather large dog would scare them away. I remember it perfectly. It was a Tuesday when the incident happened. My mum was home, doing chores and all, when she heard a knock on the door. It was kind of weird because she wasn't expecting anyone, and no one comes unannounced. Before opening the door, she looked through the window and saw a car parked in our driveway with a Dutch number plate. That made her kind of uneasy, because why would someone from the Netherlands come to our house and to our small forgotten town? Maybe he's lost and wants to ask directions, she thought. She opened the door and saw a man in his 40s with a big creepy smile. He immediately started talking in Dutch. Now, you need to understand that Belgian Dutch, Flemish, and Dutch from the Netherlands are 2 different accents. My mum is a French speaker, so she had trouble understanding him, but she understood that he was trying to sell her some stuff. He said, "I have a once-in-a-lifetime offer for you. I sell loads of stuff for good price. Are you interested?" My mother said no, which didn't please him. His smile faded slowly, and he was trying to change my mother's mind. While doing that, he was also trying to get in the house, or get a better look inside. My mother said that it felt like he was checking to see if there was anyone else in the house. By now, she was freaking out, and he wasn't going away. He was still going on and on about his products, saying stuff like,
"I have a set of kitchen knives that usually cost €200, but I'll sell them for €50, special for you."
And,
"You want to see my products? They are in my car. Come check them out if you like."
Not knowing how to get rid of him, she said she didn't have any cash, in which he responded,
"That's okay. I'll come to the bank with you. I'll drop you off there."
My mother got really tired and scared of his pushiness, so she just said, "No, maybe another time. Now is not good," and closed the door. Then he went to our window and started looking inside. Now she was officially freaking out. He was staring at her right in the eyes with a cold stare. So my mum took the phone and yelled, "I'm calling the police." She didn't. She was calling my dad. He then got back in his car and drove off. Now, a few hours had passed and she had already told everyone what had happened and also reported him to the police. She was at ease thinking she had scared him away. My dad comes home at 8 p.m, so we always have our dinner at that time. My brother always goes for a walk with our dog after dinner, and being in the middle of November, it was already dark outside. About 5 to 10 minutes later, he came back and said there was a man following him. In our street are mainly elderly people living, so no one was outside at the time. My brother's route is one where he goes behind bushy paths so my dog can poop. He noticed someone behind him in the distance stopping whenever my brother stopped, and walking whenever my brother started walking. Coming back home, he gave us the man's description, and my mum's eyes widened. That's him. That was the man from earlier. So, at this point, my dad opened the door to see if there was anyone out there, but he was already gone. A few weeks had passed, and we never saw the man again, or so we thought. My mum, being home alone as usual, went to walk the dog. As she was walking, she heard a car approaching, but slowing down near my mum. Turning around, she saw the same car from a few weeks before, with the same man. He pretended like he didn't know her and started talking to her while slowing down. He then wanted some directions. My dog is big, but he is friendly and likes strangers. But this time, he might have sensed something was off with the man and started barking at him and jumped on his car, scratching it with his nails. He drove off again, and we haven't seen him since. I can't imagine what he wanted with my mum, and what he could have done to her. Luckily, my dog was there, and scared him off. Creepy Dutch man, let's never meet again. Number 4. This story happened about 7 months ago. It was a cold winter day. Everyone in our household was out but my mum. She was cooking and realised there weren't some ingredients, so she left for the grocery store. She didn't go more than 100 metres from the house when the car got stuck in snow. Being alone, it would be impossible for her to get the car out. While she was having car trouble, these two men were collecting bottles and cans from people's recycling bins in the neighbourhood. They were both wearing cheap clothing. One was skinny, had a sharp and long face with pimples. The other one was fat, with an elliptical face more than circular. At first, they just watched my mum circle her car and try to remove some snow as best as she could with her gloves. After a while, they offered to help push the car from behind while she tried to drive it out. In return, they asked that she give them $5 in cash. So they did help my mother push the car out of the snow, and she was very thankful. Unfortunately, she didn't have the cash on hand, and it would be an inconvenience to return to the house for $5. So she pointed out our house to them, which wasn't too far off from the place she got stuck, and told them to come another day to collect their money. They were slightly disappointed and said they would return, but for the time being, as a thanks from my mum, they wanted her to give them a ride to the bottle depot. My mum, unfortunately, doesn't realise how dangerous it is for a small woman like herself to trust or have anything to do with large strangers. If something happened, she probably would be immobilised immediately without having a chance to fight. So, she ended up giving them, these strangers, a ride to the bottle depot, almost 20 minutes away from our house. They could easily have forced my mum towards a direction that they wanted as they sat behind my mum in the back seats. That night, at around 11:30 p.m, my sister was sleeping on the sofa downstairs. She fell asleep there. Someone started ringing the bell 5 times straight. We all thought it was odd as we were expecting no one. I was the first one to go downstairs and realised there were 2 men at the front door that looked somewhat drunk. They told me through the door, "There is a glass in our outdoor for light to come through, and sound comes through as well," that my mum owes them $5. By then, my mum had come downstairs too, and she did say that yes, she owed them $5 for helping her earlier in the day. My mum kept telling me to open the door, but something about these guys made me feel a bit weird, so I refused to open the door and told them to come the next day. However, once they saw my sister on the couch, in the midst of this conversation, they totally started ignoring talking to me and started calling out to my sister and even banging the door with their fists. They kept saying,
"Hey,"
and
"Hey,"
to her while hitting the front door. I ended up calling the cops on them and took the phone right near the door so they realised I was. They ended up leaving, but what's odd is that during the time they were outside, their car was on. A white, cheap-looking sedan, outside. From the way they behaved, it seemed like they wanted more than $5 that day. Maybe to rob us, or worse. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, they released on the news that 2 men were arrested for aggravated assault of a young teenage girl. About 11:30 p.m. at night, 2 men approached the teenage girl standing alone at the bus stop right near our house. They hit her and forced her into an alley right near the bus stop, and they assaulted her there. After assaulting her, they coerced her to walk 20 minutes from our community into a neighbouring community, and they forced her into their basement. Both men were brothers, and they proceeded to assault and beat this teenage girl repeatedly for the remainder of the night, until early morning. Early morning somehow, she got a chance to escape. They had left her alone for a bit. She snuck upstairs and ran out of the front door and sought help a little way off at one of the community houses. The 2 brothers, 25, the skinny one, and 27, the older one with the more weight, were arrested and will face prison sentences for assault and worse. During the entire ordeal, apparently their dad was sleeping upstairs without knowing that a girl was being assaulted and beaten downstairs throughout the night and early morning of Saturday. A bit hard to believe, but apparently the cops believed him, or they didn't have any evidence to prove otherwise. I wonder if their dad was also in the car that day they came to our house, as the car was on and remained on for a long period of time while these 2 monsters stood in the front of our house. Or maybe they just kept it on for a quick getaway. Thank God they did nothing to my mum that day. Hopefully that teenage girl recovers from her ordeal, and hopefully these 2 assaulters are not released soon to do what they will do for sure again. Number 5. This incident happened to my mum before she had me, over 20 years ago. She worked at a local pub. The pub mainly catered for fishermen, as the town is on the coast of Western Australia. So, she knew most of the people who would come in for drinks or a feed. However, every now and again, people from town would come in. She told me one bloke used to come in who she'd known from house parties around the place, and he always wanted to talk to her while she was working. And she would say sorry and keep doing her thing. One night, she finished work around midnight and walked home, which was a few kilometres away. She lived with a few housemates who were blokes, all good mates. When she got home from her shift, she decided to have a shower, making her way back to her room. She realised her door was open, which is normally shut. All the fellas were asleep, so she blew it off as the wind or something. She lay down in bed to go to sleep, but something didn't feel right, and for reasons she can't explain to me, she felt the need to look under her bed. What she saw under the bed was the bloke from the bar who had followed her all the way from work. She tells me that she just stared at him for ages and he didn't move, not even breathe, to the point she thought he was dead. She went out the room calmly and went to one of the guys' rooms to tell them she had a dead bloke under her bed. They raced in with baseball bats to find the guy halfway out the window. He managed to escape and run away. The police were called, and because they all knew who he was, the cops picked him up the next day. The thing that bothers me the most is what his intentions were with my mum that night. All he got was a fine and was never allowed back into town. Too soft in my opinion. Number 6. This story actually happened to my dad well back in the 70s in his home country of Fiji, so there is no way I can get any type of newspaper article or anything like that. But I assure you, this is real. I have verified this story with my mum and uncles, and it is all legit. So, here we go. My dad lived in a farming area, and each house, or farm, was a few miles apart from each other. When my dad was about 14 years old, he was invited to a sleepover at his uncle's house. My dad liked this uncle, so he went over for the night. His uncle had a wife and 3 kids. The ages were 3 and 4, and a baby that was about 6 months old. They had a great time eating, chatting, playing with the kids, and then it was bedtime. My dad goes to sleep and wakes up to this huge noise. Then he hears screaming and something that sounded like a gunshot. He runs to his uncle's room and sees his uncle shooting the wife and kids. My dad freaks out and runs away. He runs across the house and tries to go through one door, but he can't open it because it was jammed for some reason. It was an old farmhouse that needed lots of work. So, his only option was to run back to the other side and use the other door, which would mean he would need to cross his uncle's room again. He had no choice, and he slowly walked back and couldn't help but peek in the room. He sees his uncle standing there with a gun, and as my dad is staring at him, his uncle turns around and looks at him and says,
"You're lucky I let you live,"
and put the gun to his head. As my dad freaks out and starts running, he hears one more gunshot. My dad runs out of the house and keeps running down the dirt road all the way back to his own house. Luckily, his dad was still up with some friends drinking and playing cards. My dad basically collapses as he makes it to his front porch and tells everyone what happened. They call the police and the police go investigate and find everyone dead. A little while later, my dad finds out that his uncle had quite a few mental issues and was supposed to be taking medications for it, which he wasn't. That is the reason he went crazy that night. As you can imagine, my dad was traumatized for a long time after and had nightmares of his uncle for a long time. So, it really is a let's not meet, as his uncle is no longer alive. Once again, I assure you this story is true, as I can see it in my dad's eyes whenever he tells me this story, and I wish I could have some sort of news article, but this was in the 70s, and it was in Fiji, so there is no way I can find anything. Number 7. Let me start off by saying that this is not my tale. Believe whatever you want, but I know my dad wouldn't make this up. This is a story my dad has told and retold several times throughout the years. It is as creepy now as it was the first time I heard it. So, here it goes. It was the early 1970s in Des Plaines, Illinois. Back then, it was not uncommon to hitchhike. My dad and my uncle, his younger brother, enjoyed doing this, as they were quite the adventurers. They were both pretty young, in their early teens. They had just gone fishing when they had made their way to a nearby coffee shop parking lot, in search of a ride to get closer to home. A middle-aged man stopped to pick them up. There was nothing really striking about this guy. He just looked like a typical guy. So, they got into the car with him. My dad sat in the passenger seat, while my uncle sat in the middle back seat. Everything was fine, until the driver reached his arm towards the back of the car and put his hand on my uncle's knee. My dad's creepometer sounded right away, and as soon as they came to a stoplight, my dad got out of the car, took his brother by the arm and got the hell out of there. Fast forward a few years, it's 1978, and my dad catches a glimpse of a familiar face in the Chicago newspaper. It's the man who had picked them up a few years back. The article states that this man was arrested after the police found 33 teenage males buried in various parts of his home, including the crawl space. This sick man would find teenage boys wherever he could to assault and torture and kill. His name was John Wayne Gacy. Needless to say, I am happy my dad reacted as he did. My dad and uncle were the right age to be one of his victims. It's scary to think of what could have happened and how I wouldn't be here today. So Gacy, even though you are dead now, I am so thankful you and my dad never got to really meet. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. It was all about the terrifying stories that children have been told by their parents about their encounters. So I hope you enjoyed that. Feel free to subscribe and like. There will be more videos like this up very soon. Thank you guys for watching. Stay sinister.